All right, we are continuing our series on Acts. We're going to be in Acts chapter 7, if you have a copy of God's Word. Go ahead and flip there, or digitally, or whatever you need to do. Acts chapter 7. Now, do you not love this time of year when it's just a little bit cooler? You know what I'm talking about? I mean, it was, y'all don't know what I'm talking about? Okay. It was about 63 degrees whenever I got going this morning. And I thought, man, I love this weather. Because this time of year just means certain things to me. It means football, obviously. That's a priority in my life. And so enjoying being able to watch the football and in the coolness. It means to me that cool weather is here. So my thought is whenever you get below 70 degrees, it is legal to wear a sweater vest. And so I am going to be sporting a sweater vest for a little bit because somebody's already disagreed with me, and you can have your opinion, and it's not right. Mine is. So I love the sweater vest. I love being able to open the sunroof, and the cool air kind of come in. Turn the radio up. I listen to the radio. I don't do the Spotify or anything like that. I have my playlist. I like to be surprised whatever song's coming up next. So I'd love to have that. I love the wind just kind of blowing in my hair, makes the gray look a little bit grayer, and makes me look a little more wise, is what I was told. But I just love that. I love that this time of year, either you're going or you've already gone to apple picking. I don't know why we call it apple picking. We should call it apple buying. We go up, we go to the place, we get our bags of apples, and then we got to have the apple cider, we got to have the apple donuts. Then we realize that we just bought too many apples because the bushel was a whole lot bigger than we thought we did. Get the apples home, and then we got to call our friends and family and say, you want any apples? Because I've got too many apples over here. And so it's just this time of year that these are things that you just do. I guarantee you, somebody's already got your pumpkin spice latte or your pumpkin spice coffee or whatever. When you heard pumpkin spice is coming out, you're about to jump out your skin because this time of year, that's just what you do. As we move through this service, we're going to be talking a little bit about things that it's just what you do. In Acts chapter 7, we've already been introduced to Stephen. We saw Stephen last week. Stephen has been accused of blasphemy. He's being accused of blaspheming God, Moses, the temple, the law. I mean, they're just saying, you have blasphemed all of these things. And they don't really have anything to get him with. And so what they've done is they have a bunch of people who are coming forward and they are lying against him. And they are accusing him. And so Stephen, what is he doing? Well, he's just doing what he knows to do. It is this time where he's able to stand up and say, this is what I believe. And he's going to deny these charges. So we see in Acts chapter 7, verse 1, it says, the high priest said, are these things so? And Stephen said, brothers and fathers, hear me. The God of glory appeared to our fathers Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran. So he starts out by addressing the brothers or all those who are in the congregation. The fathers are the Sanhedrin that he's talking to. And he begins going ahead and he's going to establish the fact that he does believe in God. You are blaspheming God is what they say. And he's like, no. I'm not doing that. And for this section, he's going to be talking about how he is living God's life. Well, he calls God very distinctly, he calls him the God of glory. Now, the God of glory in Hebrew is El Hakavad. But what El Hakavad is a big name for God. We have a whole lot of names for God when we go through the Old Testament. We've got Jehovah Nisi, which means the Lord who heals. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. Jehovah Rapha, the Lord who heals. Jehovah Shalom, the Lord our peace. Jehovah Shammah, the Lord of omnipresent. And there are many more that are there. All these names of God. And what this name, the God of glory, what Stephen is automatically starting out with, he's saying, this is the God that I'm talking about. The God that is the healer, the God that is comforter, the God that is peace. This is the God, and this is the God that I believe. And so he starts defending himself with the fact that he's going to point to God. Now, whenever you have the opportunity to defend yourself, you should always start with God. You shouldn't start with what you think. You shouldn't start with your feelings or emotions, or this is what you need to go and start with God. This is what Stephen is doing. And then in verse 3, he's going to introduce to us the idea that God has given a promise to a specific person. He says, he said to Abraham, "Go out from your land and from your kindred and go into the land that I will show you." Then he went out from the land of the Chaldeans and lived in Haran. And after this, his father died. God removed him from there into the land in which you are now living. Yet he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot's length, but promised to give it to him as a possession, and to his offspring after him, though he had no child. So here's Stephen. He's already established this is God. What does God do? God calls a man. His name is Abraham. Abraham was living a good life, had everything that he needed, had his house, had his wealth, wasn't really longing for anything. But yet God comes to him and God says, I need you to go. Okay, I'll go. Many of us, if God were to say, hey, I need you to move, I need you to do something, I need you to go to a different job, I need you to figure out where you're going, we'd be like, yeah, I'm there. Our next statement would probably say, I'm there, God. Where is it? Where am I going? What does he tell Abraham? Hey, Abraham, follow me. Oh, and I'll show you where to go. I'm not going to tell you anything. But along the way, what God gives him, he says, there is a promise that I am going to give you. What is this promise? This promise is that you will inherit all these things. You will be a great nation. You don't have children now, but don't worry about that. We're going to take care of it. Just trust me in this. So there is this promise that Abraham, he leaves everything to move towards the promise. Well, Stephen goes on talking about the promise. And when he goes on in, let's see, where we had? Verse 6. He says, and God spoke to this effect, that his offspring would be sojourners in a land, belonging to others who would enslave them and afflict them 400 years. But I will judge the nation that they serve, said God, and after that they shall come out and worship me in this place. So what God is doing is he's saying, what Stephen is doing, he's saying God has made a promise. Promise was given to Abraham and to his offspring. And this promise, it's going to go through some difficult times, but don't give up. Don't give up on me. He talks about how the Israelites, how they're going to be in Egypt, and they're going to be slaves, and they're going to be serving there. But God is going to come in, and God is going to deliver them, and God is going to provide a place for them. Why? Because God made a promise. Now, some of you, you're sitting here and you're going, what on earth are you talking about? Hang on, we'll get there. We're not digging in right now. We're kind of at 30,000 feet, just kind of at our cruising altitude, and we're looking down, and maybe some are saying, man, I want to know more about that. Well, tell me about that. Let's dig into this. Not yet. We're just putting the groundwork in so that this is the promise. Promise given from God, given to Abraham, and God is controlling the destiny of Israel with this promise. Verse 8. And he gave in the covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham became the father of Isaac, and he circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob of the 12 patriarchs. Now, so here we come in and we see how God identifies his people. Now, why are they identified? Because they have a promise. And God says, this is how you will know. I'm going to make a covenant with you. And what is that covenant? The covenant is, I will be with you and the promise will be fulfilled. So again, he is coming. And Stephen, rather than coming and saying, hey, don't throw me in prison. Don't hurt me. Don't beat me. I know you say I've blasphemed, but I really haven't. They ask him the question, and they say, what is your answer to this? And that's kind of a closed question. I mean, it's either yes or no is what they're wanting. But Stephen takes the opportunity, and he's giving them kind of a lecture of what God has done. Now, we're going to be in this sermon for the next 3 weeks. So we won't get everything today, but we're focusing on Abraham and this focus. But then we come into this idea of Joseph in verse 9. Joseph, it says the patriarchs, jealous of Joseph, sold him into Egypt. But God was with him and rescued him out of all his affliction and gave him favor and wisdom before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who made him ruler over Egypt and over all his house. Now there came a famine throughout all of Egypt and Canaan and a great affliction, and our fathers could find no food. But when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent out our fathers on their first visit. And on the second visit, Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And Joseph's family became known to Pharaoh, and Joseph sent and summoned Jacob, his father, and all his kindred, 75 persons in all. And Jacob went down to Egypt. He died, he and his fathers, and they were carried back to Shechem and laid in the tomb that Abraham had bought for a sum of silver for the son of Hamor and Shechem. So now we're introduced to Joseph. Now, here's the thing, is that last week, Pastor Brad, he talked to us about how all of these things with Stephen started with these lies. These men that are telling lies. And the lies, what they did is they caused us to take a closer look at what was going on. And that's what we did last week. We took a closer look. Well, this week, we're going to have the opportunity because Joseph's story, well, it starts out with a bunch of lies. It starts out with his 11 brothers that are actually telling lies. And so when we have the opportunity here that these lies, when we take a closer look, here's what we're going to find. That our lies are leading to a lesson for each and every one of us. This week we'll call it lesson 1. Thought I'd be original with that one. Next week we'll do lesson 2. So you're with me. I know you're stuck. Your head is back and you're going, what on earth are you talking about? You're talking about Abraham and you're talking about all this stuff and I just don't get it. Okay, so let's dig in just a little bit more. We're going to get it because we had to lay the foundation. The foundation is God has made a promise. He made a promise to his people. And it went from Abraham to Isaac, and now we're looking at Joseph, and this promise is still there. But what happens a lot of times, well, almost every time, whenever God gives a promise, there's always the enemy there to give the anti-promise. They're going to give the lie. But whenever God says, this is good and I'm going to give it to you, the devil, Satan, will come and he'll say, can you really trust God? I mean, look at what you're going through. You say God has a promise for you. Can you really trust him in this? And so you have to make a decision. Am I going to trust God and the promise, or am I going to listen to the lie and quit and give up because really it's just too hard? So the story of Joseph. We look at Joseph. He had a dream. He had a couple of dreams. And in those dreams, it was that his brothers and his father and the family, they were all going to be bowing down to him. Now that made the brothers extremely angry to the fact that they wanted to kill him. And that's what they were probably discussing when they were out, when they were with their sheep and they were out letting the sheep graze. Well, Joseph was sent to the brothers to kind of check on him. And so he goes down, and the brothers are not where they are supposed to be. But yet there's this man that says, hey, you, are you looking for those guys that were with the sheep? And Joseph's like, yeah, I'm looking for them. And so he goes and he follows the directions of this man, and he finds that his brothers are all there. And as the brothers see Joseph coming, they start telling lies, and they're lying and saying, this guy is a deceiver. This guy, he's not the truth. This guy, he thinks he's something, but he is not. And in their anger, they decide, we are going to kill him. So they run and they get him. And rather than kill him, they put him in a cistern. and they throw him down in that cistern. And I don't know. I was trying to imagine. I wonder what they're doing while he's in the cistern. Now, I have daughters. I have 2 older daughters. I don't have any sons. And I've noticed some things about sons. Now, with boys, 1 boy at a time is okay. Like your boy, if you have 1, they're okay. I've seen them and they're all right. But here's the deal. Put 3 or 4 of them boys together and what do you get? You don't know what you get, do you? I mean, they going nuts. And they thinking about things and they doing boy kind of things. It just kind of scares you every once in a while. I remember when the playground is outside of Pastor Brad's office. And the CDC kids would go over there. And we spent some money on that playground. I mean, we got the good mulch, the little tire shred things. You got to pay a little extra for them. So it'll be nice for them when they come down the slide and they won't hurt their little knees. And we're just being so kind. But there's a group of like 4 boys that are caged up in that playground. You cage 4 boys up, boy, it ain't good. And I imagine one of them sat there and said, hey, here's some mulch. What do you want to do with that mulch? Well, we want to throw it. Well, where do you want to throw it? Anywhere we want to. But that big window right there looks really good. Let's see if we can make a stick on the window. And so you would be in Pastor Brad's office and you'd be talking to your dunk, dunk, dunk. You're like, wow, that's kind of crazy. But that's okay. But then one day when I rolled out and I went to my van and I thought, there was a bird that pooped all over my van. You know, there was not a bird that pooped all over my van. You know what it was? 4 boys that pooped mulch all over my van. They threw so much that I had to call Luann. I'm like, Luann, you got to have something. These people are crazy. Boys, can you imagine? You got 11 brothers that hate their... I mean, obviously one's poking them with a stick. I mean, they're throwing things. They're angry. And imagine Joseph in the bottom of that cistern going, I don't know what these guys are going to do with me. What's going to happen? But rather than killing him, they decided to sell him. There was a band of Meridian traders, and they came by and they said, hey, will you buy Joseph? Sure, we'll take him. They take him, he gets into Egypt. He gets into Egypt and gets sold into Potiphar's house. Potiphar's house was a good thing because he rose to the ranks of kind of second in command there. And he was doing pretty good, but then there was a Potiphar's wife. Potiphar's wife said, you're looking good. And he said, no, I'm not looking good. And he tried to get out of that mess. And as a result of that, she told Potiphar, he tried to sleep with me. And Potiphar got mad. Potiphar throws him in prison. Now he's in prison. And he's in prison and he meets a baker and a cupbearer. He meets the baker and the cupbearer and he tells the baker, hey, I can interpret your dream because that's what he had. And he says, your dream's not going to turn out really good. 3 days, your head's coming off your head. But the cupbearer, he has a dream, and he tells him, in 3 days, you're going to go back to your old job. You're going to be with the king. Hey, when you go to be with the king, what I want you to do is I want you to tell the king, there's a guy that's in prison that doesn't really need to be there. You need to let him out. You got to do something because I'm about tired of all this going on. So the cupbearer goes back and forgets about him for 3 years. Then after 3 years, the Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh has a dream. And the cupbearer goes, oh, I remember. There's a guy that interpreted my dream. Maybe he can do one for you. So Joseph is able to go before the king. He interprets the dream. He tells the king, hey, your dream, what it is that there is going to be a time of famine. So what you need to do is you need to get a guy that he can take care of all the stuff, get enough stuff so when the famine comes, you won't have to worry about it very much. Pharaoh says, oh, great, you're the guy. Now, all of a sudden, he is second in command. And what happens? Well, his brothers, his family are in the middle of the famine, and they come. They bow before him, and they actually need some help. Now, what is going on with all of this? If we are to dig a little bit deeper, what is going on with all this? You see, the thing is that God is protecting Joseph and putting him exactly where he needed to be so that the promise could go forth. Now, if you're Joseph and you're going through all of this mess, how on earth do you keep the attitude that God has a plan and God will provide and the promise will be fulfilled when you're going through all of the mess? You know what I'm talking about? How can you understand? Because it would be so easy for him to just say, I'm going to believe the lie. The lie is God is not who he said he is. The lie is God is not going to fulfill his promise. The lie is I'd rather just sit here, do nothing, and just die. It'd be better for me to be dead. But when the brothers come before Joseph, Joseph, when he reveals himself, says, don't worry about anything you did to me, because God needed to get me here. I just came ahead of you to prepare for when you needed something. How on earth, now I'm telling you, when you're going through the middle of the mess, are you really thinking about the promise? Or are you thinking about the lie? When we come to the place to where we don't understand, to where God says, I want you to move out and I'm not going to tell you where, to where everything is falling apart in your life and it's not your fault. It's just not working out. How on earth? Now we can look at Joseph and go, well, we know that it works out for him. We know the end of the story, but I don't know the end of my story because I'm in the middle of the mess right now. How on earth do I do that? How do I believe the promise that came from God, went to Abraham, went through everybody, and now how do I believe the promise that God has a plan and a purpose for me? Well, you have to take a step back or roll back a little bit and just kind of see. God is doing stuff all along the way. And the key is if you don't notice what God is doing, you will not believe the promise and you will believe the lie. You will allow your circumstances to overwhelm you and you will be done and you will be out of it. Now, let's just go back and just take a look. Just a minute. Because I believe in this, it just so happened. Things that just so happened. Well, we look at the story of Joseph. Well, it just so happened that he had a dream. And it just so happened that dream made his brothers so mad they wanted to kill him. It just so happened that the brothers were out and they weren't where they were supposed to be. But it just so happened that there was a man that said, Joseph, you look lost. Where are you going? He said, I'm looking for my brother. And it just so happened this is the one man that knew where the brothers were. And it just so happened that when Joseph went and saw his brothers, they didn't meet him with pleasure. They threw him in a cistern, but it just so happened that the cistern didn't have any water in it. It just so happened that the Meridian traders were coming by and they were on their way to Egypt, and it just so happened that he was sold to them because it just so happened that he ended up in Egypt, and it just so happened that he ended up at Potiphar's house. It just so happened that Potiphar's wife made an advancement at him, and Potiphar got mad, threw him in prison. It just so happened that he was in the prison. There was a baker and a cupbearer. It just so happened that there was a cupbearer that went and back and was serving the king. And it just so happened when the king had a dream that it just so happened that the cupbearer went and said, you need to go get Joseph. It just so happened that when Joseph interpreted the dream, that he was made second in command. And it just so happened that when the family came and needed help, it just so happened that Joseph was there to do that. You see, here's the thing. Joseph knew that God had promised him, and he watched it just so happened all along the way. It just so happened that all of these things, and as he focused on those, he didn't lose hope. He didn't back up. He didn't say, I quit. In fact, he didn't deal with anxiety. He didn't deal with anger. He didn't deal with any of these things because he believed in the promise and not the lie, because it just so happens was God putting little tidbits all along the way to remind him that there is a promise, and I am a God, and I am a God that fulfills my promises. It just so happened. Now, what about in our lives? What are we doing with the it just so happens in life? What are we doing when it's all falling apart? What are we doing when we can't understand? Are we about to quit? Or are we about to give up? It reminds me of a time when our family, we had taken a trip down to Atlanta. And we had gone into the world of Coca-Cola world. I don't know what it is. It's Coca-Cola universe is what it was. And so we were there and we were having a great time. And we went over to the aquarium and saw every kind of fish that you know. And we were spending the night, and we were supposed to get up the next day. And we were just kind of go find different things to do and spend another couple of nights or so there. Well, after we finished at the aquarium and we're back in our hotel, I just got the sense that we needed to go home. And so I told my wife, I said, I think we need to, very gingerly did I say this, I think we need to go home. We're not going to stay for another couple of nights on our vacation. We need to go home. She's like, why? I don't know. I just think we need to go home. So then we started on our way home. On the way home, there was a light that showed up on my dashboard. Not the check engine light, you know, the one you keep running and let it and just kind of cover it up and keep running. It was another other one. And I was like, well, I don't even know what that means. So my wife got the manual. That's why you keep the manual, to figure out why the little things are going on. And so she said, basically, there's going to be a catastrophic event happen to our electrical system on our car. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm driving up 85. I'm like, okay, well, I hope it doesn't happen soon. So we kept going. Well, then we got about the Clemson exit, and the car started making a funny sound. Now, for a South Carolina fan, you do not want to break down anywhere at the Clemson exit. That's just, God, let me break down somewhere else. I'm okay. So we got into a parking lot, and there was a Waffle House that was there. Well, while we're at the Waffle House, there's an older gentleman that was in the Waffle House with his family, and he just happened to look out and see that I was broke down. And I was trying to figure out, because it is not easy to find a wheelchair accessible van to come pick you up in Greenville. There are no Ubers that can come pick me up. There's nothing. And so I'm sitting there freaking out going, oh my goodness, I am stranded. What on earth am I going to do? And so what happened is this man told his family, why don't y'all just drive him back to Greenville? We put my wheelchair in the van. My family, they rode in the AAA truck. And I'm riding in the car with the family, because there was a man that just looked out there and saw that there was a need. And so we were able to get back home. And I was thinking through the day, I've got a choice to make. Am I going to be ticked off because it took us literally forever to get home? What is this deal about this promise? God is supposed to take care of me. God has promised that He will oversee me. God has promised that I can be a witness for Him, that I am His disciple. This is how you treat your disciple. You see, that's what the lie is popping up. And the lie is saying, is it really worth it? You going through all of this, is it really worth it? And so I've got to choose. Am I going to choose the lie, or am I going to choose the promise? Well, on its own, I'm going to choose the lie. But then I started thinking about it just so happened. You see, it just so happened that for some reason, I felt like we needed to leave a day early. It just so happened that we broke down at the Clemson exit. It just so happened that we were at a Waffle House, and it just so happened that there was a great gentleman inside the Waffle House that happened to look out and have compassion upon us. It just so happened that they said, you know what, we're going to go the extra mile and we're going to take you home. It just so happened that I had just upped our AAA coverage from the 20-mile minimum of towing to a 100-mile minimum just a couple weeks before that, so we didn't have to pay anything. It just so happened that when we got home, my other wheelchair was actually charged up, which is not very common that happens. And so when I look at that, when I look at it just so happens, it just so happened that God did this, it just so happened that God did this, it just so happened that God did this, it just so happened that God provided this. Why did all those things happen? God is throwing little tidbits and saying, if you look at it just so happens, guess where it leads you to? A lie? No. Where does it lead you? To the promise. The promise that God is in control. And I've got this. And as we sit here this morning, I wonder how many of us are dealing with anxiety, with stress, with things that are in our lives. We don't know what's happening. We don't know how to move forward. We don't know how to continue. And we're wondering, God, are you there? Are you going to use me? God, is there any purpose for me? God, why am I going through all of this? And you've got to stop. You've got to stop, because I guarantee you, if you don't look at it just so happens, and there are it just so happens there, I'm telling you, they're there. And when you start thinking about them, it just so happens leads you to you've got a loving Father, a God that has a plan and a purpose for each and every one of you, a God that says, I have a promise with you, a God that says that if you come to me, I will save you, a God that says that this is more to this life than this earth. There is a home that is waiting for you, and it is with me. You see, when we follow the it just so happens, it always leads us to the promise, and the promise of what God has in store for us. Now, there's one other thing that I was thinking about. That man that was sitting in the Waffle House, he's probably about 75 years old, and he and his wife, they go to the Waffle House. And it just so happened that they were just in the Waffle House. But what happened to him is it just so happened began when he saw me broke down. You see, he had a choice to make. It just so happened he was sitting there, and it just so happened that he saw that there was somebody that was in need. And it just so happened that he couldn't drive me back because he couldn't even drive. But his daughter sure could. And it just so happened that the daughter was having. You see, it just so happened impacted my life, and it impacted my life to where it led me from not believing a lie, but moving to the truth. You see how that works? So the question is what are we doing with the it just so happens in life? Many might go out to eat this afternoon. After church, you'll go to a restaurant, and let me tell you, it just so happens you're going to be seated at a table. And it just so happens that you're going to get a waitress. And it just so happens you have an opportunity to put a little piddly amount tip, or you can bless that young lady or young man, whoever it is, and you can say, I'm going to do something for you, and I'm going to bless you because it just so happened that I'm here. Do you see, no matter where we're at, we're there. It just so happens for a purpose. Students, it just so happens that you're in the class that you're in. It just so happens that you're sitting beside the people that you're around. It just so happens that you have the opportunity to point people to the promise that there is a God who loves and wants to do a marvelous work with each and every one of us. You see, what are we going to do with the it just so happens in life? As Christopher and Wendy come up, it makes us wonder, what is God doing? What is His plan? He's got a promise. He's got a promise for each and every one of us. And there are some that are sitting here and you're going through it and you're trying to figure out, why is God doing this? And you need to quit doing that and get to the it just so happens, because it can point you to Him. Maybe there's somebody who's here and you're like, well, I'm not really a follower of Christ, so I don't think that it just so happens applies to me. Well, it just so happened that you came to church today. Whether somebody made you or whether you decided to, it was not an accident. It just so happens that you're here. And it just so happens that the preacher that you thought you were going to see, well, he's out of town. And it just so happens you got the other guy today. And it just so happened that the other guy started talking about there's a God who has a plan and a purpose for your life. And it just so happens that God's plan and purpose for your life is for you to yield yourself to Him. Because the hurts, the hang-ups, the habits, the things that you are dealing with, well, God is all about saying, I want to forgive you of those sins. I want you to come in. I want you to find rest. And it just so happens that in just a minute, we're going to have an opportunity to respond. The question is, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I can imagine. Can you imagine if we got a hold of this and we went out into our community and we're not worried about us because it just so happens God's already provided the promise, and we start looking at everybody else and saying, how can I be your it just so happened? How can I be part of your story that will help lead you from where you're at to the promise of what Christ has in store for us? I'm telling you, it'd change our community. Things would be so different. There would be such a revival going on because people are just watching. God is moving. God is working. God is doing this. God has got a plan. What are we going to do? In a moment, I'm going to pray. And we're going to stand. Well, you will, not me. And we're going to just come to the place of just saying, God, what do you want us to do? I mean, some of you online, you're right here and you're going, I can't do anything. Can't even make it to church. It just so happened you listen to this. It just so happened God's got something for you to do. For every single one of us, God's got a plan. His promise never fails.